Across the state of Colorado, trade supports more than 1 out of every 5 jobs. That's over 720,000 of our friends, our families, and our neighbors. Thank you for joining us. My name is Pat McConnell with Americans for Prosperity, and we're honored to be here today alongside so many leaders of business, industry, and government from all over the world to learn more about how trade builds Colorado. So throughout today's discussion, please utilize the Q&A box for questions for us as well as our panelists, and we'll do our best to get those answered in the time allotted. And you can also utilize the chat box for networking and getting to know one another. And I'd like to begin by thanking Karen Gerwitz and the rest of her team at the World Trade Center Denver for their tireless efforts in building a strong future for Colorado by helping businesses collaborate, connect, and thrive on the global stage, by thinking bigger than just importing and exporting. Because free trade means building alliances, more prosperity, and a better future for all of us. Now, we have an incredible lineup today, including a highly distinguished panel discussion about the changes and impacts recently brought about by the USMCA that Karen Gerwitz will be moderating. But before we get to that, we'd like to thank our coalition partners for their support. In addition to the World Trade Center Denver, the Colorado Business Roundtable, the Colorado Farm Bureau, and Manufacturers Edge have been instrumental in highlighting not only the importance of trade, but the impacts of trade barriers on our businesses and our communities. And we're excited to see our support growing. So we'd like to invite others to join our coalition and become part of a unified voice in support of free trade. So now we'd like to take just a minute and do a quick anonymous 3-question poll so we can get to know our audience a little bit better. So we'll have a poll pop up here on the screen in a minute. Please share your input and we'll share the results here at the end. All right, so the first question is, what percentage of your profits are impacted by trade? Second question is, what would you identify as the biggest barrier to more Colorado companies exporting? And finally, the third question, the current administration is currently proposing a 100% tariff on European wine as a retaliatory measure due to the Airbus-Boeing trade dispute. Who do you think this will harm the most? All right, just take a few more seconds filling out everybody's answers. All right, just a few more seconds.
Looks like we're having some trouble with people filling in the answers to the polls.
We're getting some responses in there. Okay, so it looks like we got a good number of responses in there. And thank you everyone for sharing your input. These results really demonstrate the benefit that trade provides, as well as the impact that these trade barriers have on our businesses. Just the average number here, 50 to 59%, huge response there. That makes a major impact on profitability and growth. So thank you everybody for taking the time and sharing your input there. All right, so why are we doing this? We're doing this to build strong partnerships, to bolster grassroots engagement, and to educate our decision makers. Because by working together, we can better educate Colorado lawmakers about trade's impact on job creation, supply chains, emerging industries, and business growth. We've prepared a letter humbly urging our congressional delegation to reduce trade barriers in order to aid in our economic revitalization. And we invite you to add your business's name to demonstrate your support for free trade and the benefits that it brings. We've also collected stories from all across the state about these impacts. So thank you to Jeff Popiel with GEOTECH Environmental Equipment, Veronica Farrow with Segrity, Craig Vollmer with Vollmer Farms, Ashley Warsh with the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and Victoria Bruner and Kenny Fisher with Fatty Bikes for sharing your stories. We're going to take just a minute and play one of our stories now. This one's from Ashley Warsh with the Colorado Department of Agriculture. So if you're on and listening, thank you, Ashley.
Agriculture is a major industry here in Colorado that provides safe and delicious products to consumers not only here in Colorado, but around the world. Trade is important for Colorado agriculture because we are able to produce a high-quality product that consumers not only want, but also need. Trade not only helps companies grow because the majority of the population live outside of the U.S., but because it allows us the opportunity to import and receive quality inputs. We are lucky to be here in Colorado and have so many great companies, producers, and products around the state. Trade is vital for Colorado agriculture.
Ashley's story is a great example of why trade matters to Colorado agriculture. From beef to beer to wheat and dairy, the ag products that our farmers produce are sold around the world, and we'd like to help share even more of your stories. So on August 12th and August 13th, we have a videographer in the Denver area, and we can come to you and help you tell your story. We can come to your location, film, get some great B-roll, really highlight your business and the benefits that trade provides, as well as the impact of trade barriers. So send us a message in the chat and we'll help make that happen. So without further ado, it's my honor to introduce Karen Gerwitz, President of the World Trade Center Denver, to lead our distinguished panel of experts to discuss the changes and impacts recently brought about by the USMCA.
Great. Thank you so much, Pat. It's such a pleasure partnering with you on free trade. Certainly a topic near and dear to our hearts. And I am so excited to facilitate this discussion on the most important free trade agreement to the United States and to try to help shed some light on this updates from NAFTA to USMCA. But first, let's talk about the most obvious change, and that is the name. What's in a name? USMCA, CUSMA, ASEUM, TMEC. Each of us now are referring to what used to be called NAFTA in a different way now. And you know, it's really still the same free trade agreement with some updates. And to be honest, NAFTA has probably been updated, I don't know how many times, probably 15 or more times throughout its 26 years. But this was definitely a policy agenda item from the current administration to update the agreement to such an extent that a name change was deemed necessary. Regardless, though, of what it is called, from whichever perspective we call it, the concept of creating a much stronger trading bloc for North America will carry us forward as a regional unit and allow us to compete better on the global stage with other trade blocs. All of that remains the same, regardless of what the name is. Let's talk a little bit about the impact of trade with North America. Just a couple stats I wanted to throw out. First off, 3.6 billion with a B dollars per day is traded across North America. That's an incredible amount. And 47% of all of the United States fuel that comes into the US comes from Canada. Colorado sold $4.6 billion of goods and services to Canada and Mexico last year, 97% of which Colorado's beverages, all of our beverages, beer especially, are sold to Canada and Mexico. Here's an overall stat. 1 in 5 jobs comes about due to trade in general. And 1 in 3 acres of farmland are planted for export. In other words, trade matters. That would be a good hashtag for today, hashtag trade matters. The reason trade matters today is that we truly make things together. The top 5 import categories from Mexico and Canada are essentially the same as the Colorado export categories, meaning roughly 83% of the imports we're getting from Canada and Mexico are used as inputs by US producers. From circuit boards, medical devices, vehicles, and agriculture products, we specialize in what we do well and trade with those who produce things better and cheaper, making it a win-win for all. Our trading partners also make the best allies. The old adage of let's send containers, not soldiers, holds true for our strongest trading partners to our north and south. Since we make things together, we absolutely rely on each other and have each other's backs, especially when it comes to security. NORAD in Colorado Springs is a great example. It's a binational Canadian-US military command, but for more than 50 years, the US and Canada military members have been working side by side to secure and protect our 2 vast countries. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists who are here today. It's an august group. I'm very proud to convene them. Let me first introduce our cherished diplomats. I'll start with Consul General of Mexico, Berenice Rendon Talavera, who's been serving Denver since 2017, and Consul General of Canada, Stéphane Lessard, based in Denver since 2016, also served as the Dean of the Consular Corps here in Colorado. Let me ask each of you to join us and unmute yourself, please. And I also, Stéphane, I would like to thank you for your many years of service here. This is Stéphane's swan song. He is going to be leaving the state of Colorado in his post. This is his I'm not sure if it's your last official event, but we certainly appreciate you taking time to be with us today. You know, I often joke with both Berenice and Stéphane that without them tipping us off on how the U.S. trade policy decisions of late are harming them as Canadians and Mexicans, I doubt we'd even be made aware of some of these changes that are happening. So both of you, welcome. Thank you for being here. Let me start with Berenice. From your individual, from Mexico's perspective, what was the #1 win for Mexico in upgrading from NAFTA to USMCA?
Yes, thank you very much, Karen, and all the panelists for being here and inviting us for this interesting panel. For Mexico, all along was to maintain the strategic partnership with the United States and Canada. And under that came what we have been talking about for the last 2 years here in Colorado and everywhere else, is about certainty, about continuity and stability for trade and investments. And I think that was achieved on the part of Mexico because, as you remember, we have ups and downs, and sometimes it seemed like a roller coaster a year ago, 2 years ago, during the negotiations. But finally, it came to an end, the negotiation, and we kept those issues. The other thing for Mexico is more opportunities to strengthen competitiveness in the region, because maybe we will have more trade and investments since we have new sectors, telecommunications, e-commerce, new regulations on labor, environment, anti-corruption issues. And I think of late, the COVID times that we are living in has proved how important it will be, and it is, to have supply chains, production supply chains in the region, so we don't depend so much on pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, or whatever comes after all this situation regarding how we produce, how we sell, how we import, export, etc. E-commerce, for instance, will be after COVID, or it is with COVID, a very important issue in our economies. So I will leave it at that right now. If you want, we can keep talking about it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Stéphane, please join us and tell us from the Canadian perspective, what were the #1 wins for this upgrade?
Thank you, Karen. From a Canadian perspective, the important thing was to preserve the gains we had achieved under NAFTA, where we had, over the last 25 years or so, not only grown trade dramatically between the three countries, but we had also changed the way we make things. So we started making things together, whether it be cars, airplanes, defense equipment, agricultural products, so on. And all of that integration between us was the stepping stone to our future competitiveness. So important, first of all, was do no harm, and we've certainly done that. We have an agreement that is preserves free trade, that is tariff-free trade between the three countries for 99.9% of goods that we make. And again, we make them together with our integrated supply chains, always further integrated every day. And I think that's the seed for continued prosperity. And perhaps looking at it from, I don't know if it's geopolitical or not, but business perspective, I think this is a time, because of the pandemic, but also other factors, including increased protectionism in different parts of the world. This is a time we hear from business leaders where some of them are rethinking their supply chains and their suppliers being perhaps in remote places in the world, and the risks associated and the costs associated with having suppliers in different places that are perhaps subject to trade measures and so on. So, and the pandemic, I think, has highlighted again the risks of that we expose ourselves to, our vulnerabilities, if we rely on suppliers in other countries, not to mention China or others, for essential goods. And I think the combination of these factors is one where the USMCA can not only maintain what we've achieved, but take us further as a springboard to further strengthen our supply chains within North America, make ourselves, as Berenice said, ever more competitive, because other trading blocs are doing the same, and we need to continue out-competing them on the world markets. I think also, this is a time where we can strengthen the competitiveness of our companies further within North America, and that will continue to create prosperity, jobs and for our families and communities. What I would say, though, that the caveat is a trade agreement like USMCA, or what we call CUSMA in Canada, as you noted. A trade agreement is only as good as the actions that we put behind it. And if we were to retrench into further protectionist measures within North America, to put tariffs on each other because of various political or other factors, then that would undermine the gains that we've achieved under NAFTA. And there are many ways, tariff-based or non-tariff-based measures that can be protectionist rather. So we have to be careful. We can't count our chickens in that sense, and just be sure that we continue to abide by the spirit of the USMCA. And I would just like to say a word on a personal side, Karen, if you allow me to mention, thank you for convening us today. This is indeed my last event as Consul General of Canada in the region. And I wanted to thank everybody online and all our partners who have made the last 4 years for me, the highlight of my career and a true privilege to serve in this beautiful region. Thank you very much.
We are so honored to have you here and count you as a friend. Look forward to coming up to Ottawa and visiting you there. So thank you
Anytime.
for being here today. Great. Let's go ahead and move it on, if we could, to Everett Eisenstadt. Everett is a former U.S. government official who currently serves as Senior Vice President of Global Public Policy for General Motors. He is the former Deputy Director of the National Economic Council, and among other roles, he's served as Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for the Western Hemisphere, focusing on trade agreements with Chile, Colombia, Panama, and Peru. Everett, welcome. As a longstanding trade professional who used to negotiate these multifaceted agreements as Assistant USTR, how do these advancements of USMCA compared to maybe what we would have gotten under the U.S. Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, first, thank you for allowing me to be part of this important event, and congratulations for the great work that you're doing on behalf of Colorado and the nation, really in highlighting the importance of trade to the U.S. economy and to the state's economy. We at General Motors have facilities across the country. We full-heartedly endorse your belief that trade is fundamental to growth, and really appreciate your stepping up to do this important panel. So I would say that first, let me just say we're very, very pleased about the agreement. As you know, it went into force just last month, July 1st, started with the implementation. We at General Motors are fully committed to seeing its success. And as was said by the Consul General, the integrated supply chains is absolutely one of the key elements of the USMCA. we had done some, when we looked at this, we were concerned that the agreement wouldn't go forward. We analyzed our own supply chains, and we know that car parts cross a border many, many times. In fact, we know, it could be 8, 10, 12 times before a car part comes across and becomes a fully assembled vehicle. So it's the supply chains, the connectivity, and the integration is absolutely fundamental. And so I think one of the key differences between the USMCA and the TPP is the degree of integration in the region. There's no question that had TPP gone forward, it would have been more of it would have been a different type of supply chains. The supply chains would have been much more diverse, from China to Malaysia. And I think we would have seen perhaps a diffusion of the regional supply chains. And I think what the USMCA has done is really solidified the integration in the region, and if anything, had enhanced the importance of the supply chain. I'll just give you some examples. Because of the USMCA, we just invested about $300 million in a Lake Orion, Michigan plant that would help us ensure compliance. We've also put on joint facility with LG Chem, a battery manufacturing facility in Lordstown, Ohio, which is a $2.3 billion investment, where we're going to make battery cells for our new vehicles. And a big part of that was because the integrated supply chains of the USMCA. So we're very committed to it. It's highly important. I think it has a very good effect on the region and will be very good for our growth. I just want to say one quick point about the pandemic and the COVID response. As some of the panelists have already said, the geostrategic element of this can't be overlooked. I think you said that, in fact. It's really true. And the relationships we have with our counterparts, both in the private sector and the government, are absolutely essential. We value them so highly. And the pandemic, during the pandemic, we worked with governments both in Mexico and Canada to ensure supplies of masks. We started a facility in Toluca, Mexico, to make masks. We started a facility up in Canada to make masks for our workers there. We were making masks and PPE here. And it's those relationships that really mattered and let us have a regional response to a really, really devastating pandemic. So I just want to thank both consul generals and their governments for their willingness to work with General Motors in fighting the pandemic and helping us, get to where we are, and we'll look forward to continuing to work with them to ensure its success going forward.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We'll come back to you in a bit. Thank you again.
Pleasure.
I'd like to now turn it to Yuri Uno. Yuri represents Toyota Motor North America for over 20 years now, and she's also serving as the Director of Trade Policy for the company. Yuri also served as past president for Women in International Trade, a great organization supporting trade. Yuri, thank you for joining us. Are you there? Just want to make sure you're...
Yes, thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you, Yuri.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be on the panel. My best friend lives in Denver, so I am so disappointed that I'm not there in person, but thank you very much for including me. Unfortunately, I have to leave after my remarks, so if anybody has a question, I'll take it after my remarks. But I'm very excited to be on this panel. As you know, Toyota has 10 manufacturing facilities in the U.S. Actually, the 10th one is being built. It's a joint venture with Mazda in Alabama. We built 30 million vehicles in the United States since 1986, and USMCA is definitely very important to us. We have 180,000 employment, including the dealers. So this is very impactful to the U.S. economy. But USMCA definitely has some very unique requirements to make sure that auto sector is producing more components in the United States. So if I may just mention some of these uniqueness. Well, first of all, NAFTA already had the highest content requirement under any FDA that's out there in the world, which was 62.2%. That means unless our car, 62.5% of our car was produced within North America, even if the final assembly is done in the US, we can export duty-free to Canada and Mexico. We have to make sure that enough contents are produced in North America. And Toyota has this principle, produce where we sell and procure where we produce. So we have always worked very hard to make sure our contents stay very high. But that threshold was just increased to 75% under USMCA. So it's much higher now. In addition to that, they have this labor value requirement. That means you have to produce certain amount of vehicle at the plant where they pay at least $16 per hour. So for passenger cars, 40% of vehicle has to be produced at the plants where they pay at least $16 per hour. And for trucks, it's 45%. So not only that you have to produce more in North America, they wanted to make sure that people who are producing in auto industry are getting paid at least $16 per hour. So other things that was very strategic by the negotiators to negotiate was that key components, they wanted to make sure key components of the vehicles are produced within North America. So these strategic parts are produced in North America was very important to them. And those components are, of course, engines, transmissions, axle, traditional auto parts, right? Body and chassis, steering system, suspension system, all those things have to be produced in North America. So even if your rest of vehicle is produced in North America, if any of these things are not produced in North America, you don't qualify. And also advanced battery for non-combustion engine vehicles as well. Lastly, they wanted to make sure steels and aluminums were made in North America. So 70% of vehicles of the steel and aluminums that we use in the vehicles have to come from North America. So all these things are like set in place to make sure that to increase more components to be produced in North America.
Okay, wow, that's it seems really restrictive.
Yeah.
And yet you're still smiling. Surprising about that. So would you say that this is a win or a additional regulatory burden on the company?
So we've had this internal working group that we set up like a few years ago when we knew the rules were going to be very different. And they've been very dedicated to make sure that we can meet the rules. We've been working very hard to make sure that we meet the rules for all the vehicles that we produce in North America, especially our trucks coming from Mexico, because truck tariff is 25%. We're not going to pay 25%. We can't do that, right? So we have to make sure that we produce enough content within North America and in the US. And we are continuing to invest, just like Everett was mentioning about GM, we continue to invest in the United States and within North America so we can continue to meet USMCA rules.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that update. I wish you well. And
thank you.
I appreciate your time here today. I know that you need to bow out. I don't see any questions just yet for you. So if you need to drop off, that's fine. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I think you're in good hands with Everett for auto industry anyway.
Perfect. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Let me now turn to Sue Taylor. Sue is the VP of Dairy Economics and Policy for Leprino Foods, the largest mozzarella cheese producer in the world that hails here right in Denver. They also produce whey protein powder and other dairy-based products. Sue has worked for Leprino for 25 years. Sue, are you with us? I want to make sure you're...
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. So Sue, welcome. Thank you for being here today. The dairy industry had some significant changes significant challenges within NAFTA. And some of the most significant changes and wins, you might say, with the USMCA were said to be with the dairy industry, especially in Canada. I would love for you to describe kind of what changes took place and what the significant impact might be on Leprino.
Certainly, and thanks for inviting me. Trade is so critical to agriculture. Agriculture in general is a net exporter. The dairy industry is highly reliant on expanding our exports and export demand. And I'll drop back into the broader context of the NAFTA renegotiation and say that Mexico is far and above our most important export customer. And we were very concerned as the negotiations were started that the metals tariffs and other tactics by the administration were risking that market and our relationship with Mexico. And so in large part, to start with, our first and foremost objective was to do no harm to that market. And that was achieved. We had some bumps along the way, and there are a number of things that I would have liked not to have happened along the way that were disruptive. But ultimately, the market with Mexico was retained as a duty-free market, which was first established under the initial NAFTA, with some minor tweaks in terms of administrative processes that are helpful. Canada, with all due respect to the Consul General, has always been our problem child. Under the WTO, the tariffs on cheese going into Canada are 245%. They maintain a highly protected supply management program in Canada and highly protective of that sector. Very strong lobby, dairy lobby in Canada. And although there was a significant victory dance done across some of the dairy players in terms of progress made in the renegotiation, I would consider that pretty nominal in terms of the improved access. We did get slightly more access on cheese and some other dairy products. On cheese, it looks to me like it's about 0.4% of the Canadian market. Initially goes up to a little over 2%, pretty nominal numbers. And then our next question is how that new access is managed. And in the initial approach that Canada has in terms of administering that new access, we have a number of concerns. The tariff or the import licenses are largely going to manufacturers in Canada who would be our competitors. And so designed to minimize the fill would be our first assessment. And also about half to industrial uses. So pushing the value of imports downward. Wow. The other piece that had a victory dance around it is Canada, because they've maintained the supply management program within their industry and moved prices up to very high levels, they're not competitive in the world market, but on some components, they are surplus. And so they have designed into a very complex milk pricing system there, a mechanism to what we would consider subsidized exports of some milk powders. Their reforms on that piece of their distortion are to be implemented over the next 6 months. And so we're watching vigilantly as they make those adjustments in their regulations to see if actually they come through or whether they rename those programs and hide them in a different way. So yes, we made progress, but maybe not to the extent that the victory dances would imply.
Got it. So there's room to grow, but thank you so much for that. It's helpful to know kind of where we truly stand with that. I appreciate your frank and honesty comments. So let me move, if I could, to Lynn Granger. Lynn serves as the Executive Director of the American Petroleum Institute and former COO of Colorado Concern. Lynn, are you with us?
I am.
Great. Maybe you could answer this question. What does the USMCA mean for regional energy security? And for that matter, the participating nations' respective national security? Welcome.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks so much for having me and for organizing this. It's definitely something to celebrate for sure. First I'd say, the North American energy markets are deeply integrated and interconnected, and the free flow of energy products and investments in natural gas and oil across our borders is absolutely critical. Personally, not only am I a proud representative of the natural gas and oil industry, but I'm also an Army vet, and I've had the honor of participating in several multinational exercises with both Canada and Mexico, greatly improving our interoperability, and readiness. And this trade agreement, in my opinion, is another great step in our truly successful partnership for sure. For the first time in 75 years, the U.S. has achieved energy independence, which is a crucial component to our national security. And North America is not far behind. The production of petroleum and other liquids by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico will soon outpace our collective consumption, which will be amazing. Not to mention that this also allows North America to be less reliant on other suppliers and less subject to potential supply disruptions because of free and safe energy trade with our friends and allies in Canada and Mexico. Bottom line, Karen, the passage of USMCA will allow the natural gas and oil industry to continue providing affordable, reliable, and cleaner energy that powers North America's economic prosperity while simultaneously increasing our national and regional security. And that's fantastic. And I would love, if we have some time, to hear Stefan or Bernice's thoughts on that regional security aspect as well.
Perfect. We can come back to them. Thank you so much, Lynn. Let me now introduce Rich Harper. He's the Manager of International Trade for the Outdoor Industry Association, obviously a very important industry here in Colorado. The association is headquartered in Boulder, but Rich is based in Washington, D.C. Rich, are you with us? Welcome.
Yes, thank you. And greetings to my fellow panelists. Thank you, Karen, for the invitation. A particular hello to Everett, my old friend and colleague from my Capitol Hill days. So great to be on a panel with you again, Everett. You're exactly right, Karen. I mean, outdoor recreation is huge in Colorado. It supports 229,000 jobs, $28 billion in consumer spending, and 71% of Coloradans get outdoors for outdoor recreation. So it's a huge economic driver in the state. And for our members, most of our members are small and medium-sized businesses. So there's significant benefits here in the agreement. I'm starting off with a dedicated chapter to SMEs, a panel of government representatives from each of the parties dedicated to promoting trade investment among SMEs. It also cuts through some red tape, requiring the publication of taxes and tariffs and regulations. Online searchable database of customs procedures. So these will help our small, medium-sized businesses cut through, some of the red tape. But just as important in building off the comments from the Consul General of Canada, it preserves what was already in place, the 25 years of reciprocal duty-free market access for outdoor apparel, footwear, and equipment. So the outdoor company that has a manufacturing facility for footwear in Mexico, those products remain duty-free, and that's not insignificant. A pair of hiking boots can have a tariff up to 37.5%. And for our domestic manufacturers here in the U.S., also preserving the duty-free market access to Canada and Mexico for Made in USA gear, and of course a lot of the inputs from our Made in USA companies do also come from Canada and Mexico. So preserving what was already there was a huge win for the industry, and preserving the benefits of the agreement for the past 25 years. And I would also be remiss if not pointing out that in terms of looking at the upgrades for SMEs, for our small, medium-sized businesses, it's also true that the core values of the industry and for those businesses are protecting labor rights, protecting the environment, and seeing the labor environmental provisions move to the core text of the agreement was a huge step forward, for those benefits. And so we look forward, to seeing the agreement continue to grow in an era of uncertainty in trade and global supply chain for outdoor companies. USMCA provides some certainty. And so I think you will start to see a movement in some of the supply chains out of the Asia Pacific region closer to home as a result of having the USMCA, having NAFTA revised and renewed under USMCA.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that update, Rich. I appreciate it. Thanks for being on today. I do need to move it on. We're running a little short on time. So Whitney Rink, please join us now. She is the trade compliance professional from IBM. She's certainly worked with many other Colorado global firms like Miller Coors, Polycom, and Gates. Whitney, are you with us? I'd love to talk to you about how USMCA was upgraded or modernized for our global economy related to technology and digital trade.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So really, the USMCA is essential for our businesses to compete in today's tech environments. NAFTA was signed over 25 years ago. In 1994, less than 0.25% of the global population used the internet compared to more than 58% today, and maybe even more through the times of COVID. So NAFTA mentions things like the telegraph, but not the internet. So this alone makes it obvious that NAFTA is outdated for today's e-commerce environment. It's believed that half of all value created in the global economy over the next decade will be created digitally. So we are moving even more towards a digital age now than before. The agreement also recognizes that data and innovation are the foundational components of the world's economy, and it is establishing a first of its kind digital trade chapter. I believe that the new digital trade chapter does contain the strongest disciplines on digital trade of any previous international agreement. It allows us to expand in our innovative products and services so that the United States can continue to have a competitive advantage. The USMCA protects companies from being required to share source code, encryption keys, algorithms as a condition for market access. So it's really protecting the proprietary tools and formulas that US tech companies need in order to stay competitive. Countries are also continuing to explore ways to use tariffs to discriminate against US digital trade products. So the USMCA makes restrictions against digital tariffs permanent so that we can continue to have a duty-free internet, and it also sends a clear message to our trading partners. So I really believe that USMCA is setting the gold standard for modern trade in order to help us compete better in the 21st century economy. And really, it's not only tech companies that benefit from the USMCA's digital trade provisions. US companies across all industries are relying on data, technology, and digital services to optimize our operations, enabling employees to collaborate better and boost our abilities to meet customer needs better. So these are just some of the trade barriers faced by companies in the US, and this is just a few examples I feel that the USMCA is being modernized to help us keep up with our global economy.
Perfect. Thank you so much for those thoughts, Whitney. I appreciate it. Now, let me just ask all panelists to chime in. Whoever would like to, feel free. But we've got lawmakers on the call today, both at the congressional level and a local level, about, I'd love to hear from you. How would you educate them on what tariff or non-tariff barriers are most damaging to your industries or to your nations? And also comment, if you will, on any retaliatory or other challenges you've seen with the steel and aluminum tariffs or any of the other tariffs that you've seen come about as a result of some recent protectionism from the US. So would love to just open that up to anyone who would like to share about tariffs or non-tariff barriers or just really advice on where we should go from here.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'll jump in because there is something really important that we still need to tackle. And I think that the USMCA went a long way in addressing the current supply chain challenges. And as many of the panelists said, creating stability and predictability in the regions are very welcome. But we have a lot more work to do in the region. We have infrastructure needs. We have transportation, integration. And I think we need to keep our eye on the future, which is rapidly moving towards electric vehicles and self-driving vehicles. And this really is going to be one of the cutting edge, really just transformative parts of the U.S. economy. And so I hope that the governments and can work together to try to, one, get safety standards that are fair to eliminate non-tariff barriers, but two, to think about how do we continue to drive the development of electric vehicle infrastructure in North America. How do we create an environment for investment in electric vehicles and self-driving vehicles? It's really important for the future of the USMCA, and I think it's important for the environment and the future growth of the region. So I'll just do a quick plug in. We're actually unveiling a vehicle tonight. It's very, very exciting. It's one of the first electric vehicles, the Cadillac Lyriq. For those of you who aren't watching anything in particular, I'd like to see something pretty cool. 7 o'clock Eastern time, it'll be unveiled, and it's open to the public. It's just a touch of what the future is going to bring, but it's really exciting. And we think this is just the beginning of a really powerful development of the electric vehicle industry in North America.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Tune in today for a GM launch. Thank you so much, Everett. Who else would like to comment on where we could go from here? What are some other things that still need to be worked on?
Karen, if you
Yes,
allow me.
Stefan, please join us.
Yeah, just thank you. No, just a couple of things. Maybe in terms of looking forward, I think we have a USMCA now. We have to maximize the use of it. And I'll get back to your question about tariffs in a second. But to pick up on Everett's point about more work to do, I think there's more potential to further integrate our North American economies. And I don't know if many people understand that USMCA did not really move the needle on the movement of people, professionals, workers between the three countries. And this is just me talking, not necessarily the government, but in respect to, we know our companies, because our companies have a presence in many cases in 2 or 3 of the countries under USMCA. We know our companies need to move people around. And even within supply chains, companies want to establish a presence perhaps in another country or deal with a partner, and they need to move people around, and it's possible, but it's still subject to complicated, costly rules around visas and so on and so forth. And again, USMCA did not move that needle towards further liberalizing the movement of people. And looking forward, that might be an area that our 3 countries need to look at a little bit more. In terms of tariffs, all I would say is we have strong views about tariffs in Canada. And I don't think we're the only ones. We're very careful with this because we know that tariffs, if a country imposes a tariff on another country's exports into our country, then it becomes a tax. It becomes an import tax. And an import tax is not paid by the exporter into my country. It's paid by the importers, who are often businesses, who then have to pass that tax on to their purchasers or eventually to the consumer. And so whether we call it a tariff, a duty, whatever, these are taxes that are paid by the importing country's businesses, raising costs and further undermining the benefits of having a free trade agreement to begin with. So, for example, there's talk about reimposing aluminum tariffs of 10% on Canadian exports into the US of aluminum. This would raise the price to US businesses at a time when we need to be thinking about economic recovery, and raising costs on US businesses, for example, is not the best time. There's never a good time, but first of all, we don't see the reason to do that because we challenge the factual basis for it. But at the same time, we should be thinking about strengthening our competitiveness in North America. Absolutely. And we should just move on from that thinking and maybe look to strengthening what we have in North America so we can outcompete the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for those thoughts. We are running short on time. So if anybody else would like to share a few last thoughts about where we could go from here, what still needs to be improved, we'd love to hear from you. Just a rapid fire Q&A right now.
Aaron, if I could just jump in quickly, I think for outdoor companies, you want to make sure that USMCA is a springboard for additional bilateral and multilateral deals. As I mentioned, outdoor companies pay on average about 14% tariffs on their products, as high as 37.5% for hiking boots, 32% for a polar fleece jacket, 17% for a backpack. So we hope that this is the springboard for additional deals that can get at some of these tariffs, which are ultimately taxes on outdoor companies and consumers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rich.
Karen, from my perspective, some of the non-tariff barrier issues are actually increasing, whether it's departure from science-based food safety regs or whether it's labeling issues and enforcement that continue to move around. That's an area that needs to continue to be focused on in future trade agreements around the world.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I'm sorry I didn't get to hear from everybody. If I don't want to cut anybody off, it's hard to tell on the virtual if anybody else would like to share. But what I do want to say is that I could talk to this panel all day long. You all have a wealth of information, and I hope this is one of many conversations we'll have on USMCA. There's still a lot of unknown factors because it just went into place July 1, and probably none of us have read the entire agreement. It's pretty lengthy. These agreements typically take years to come into place. This one moved a little quicker than I ever anticipated, but it also gave us a rocky road along the way. I want to thank all of you so much for joining us today, and I hope you'll, if we get other questions, I don't see many other questions here from our panelists, but certainly there may be some along the way. So we will keep an eye on that and point those to you. One question we did get for Everett is how do you find the launch of that new car? Maybe you could tap that in the chat box for everybody.
Well, I'd love to do that. Unfortunately, I'd have to go across the room, and I can't actually. But I've asked one of my colleagues. In fact, I think she just sent it to the chat box, and hopefully, let me get into the chat box. Yes, she just sent the link there.
Perfect.
I'll read it real quick. Well, actually, I won't. But I hope if you are in the chat box, it is there.
Okay.
It's a really cool vehicle. I've seen it. I can't wait to get in and drive it. And I hope that everybody, who's interested in cars has a chance to look at it. It's the future of Cadillac, the future of EV. That's pretty cool. Perfect. Thanks for having me here.
Become a Cadillac driver after all. So thank you so much, all of you. I really appreciate your time and expertise on this panel. And I definitely want to give one last shout out to Consul General Lassard, who has served us well here in Colorado. We wish all of you safe well-being for your families, and we appreciate you taking the time here today. Good luck with your future endeavors, not only with the North American trading bloc, but worldwide. And please let us know how we could support you. So again, thank you all. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Pat.
All right, well, thank you, Karen. And thank you to our esteemed panel for sharing your knowledge, your insight, your expertise. As Karen mentioned, $3.6 billion a day is traded across this block. And that really demonstrates the depth and the value of these relationships. So now we'd like to take this opportunity to share another story. And this story is from Jeff Popiel with GEOTECH Environmental Equipment, who imports and exports environmental products to 100 different international markets. And Jeff's discussing how trade barriers impact manufacturers that export around the world.
I'm Jeff Popiel with GEOTECH Environmental Equipment here in Denver, Colorado. We're a manufacturer of products and we export around the world. In order to do so, we import products, and we do so for the most part without duties and taxes. And we're dependent on that. If they were taxed, we would have to raise the price of the goods of our products before we export them. And if we're taxing other people's products as they come into our country, they then tax our products as we export to their country. So free and fair and open trade makes it for a dynamic global economy where parts are made where it's most efficient to be made around the world. And that's the way it should be. Trade matters, and trade builds Colorado.
But Jeff's story does a great job of highlighting the impact that trade barriers have on our importers and our exporters. As we discussed today, trade barriers lead to higher prices, decreased choice for consumers, supply chain disruptions, and uncertainty. Whether it be tariffs or other non-tariff barriers, they harm our economy. For example, the Section 232 tariffs placed on steel and aluminum imports have not only a direct impact, but also a downstream impact on products and consumers. Steel and aluminum are key manufacturing materials, and tariffs increase the cost of production, raising the cost of goods and making American companies less competitive here at home and overseas. And then, as we discussed, the other issue we have to consider are retaliatory measures, because as we raise our trade barriers, other nations respond in kind. And what happens is that Colorado businesses are stuck in the middle. Did you know that last year, Colorado's beverage industry lost 60% of its export sales due to the increase in the price of aluminum, along with the impact caused by retaliatory tariffs from other markets? So what happens is when tariffs increase, businesses are left with three options. They can absorb the higher cost, which means lower profit margins, decrease competitiveness. They can increase prices and risk losing business. Or they can retool their supply chain. But I think everybody on here understands that that is a monumental task. Moving operations to another country, rerouting products, switching suppliers. These are time-consuming and expensive propositions, and in many cases, the components may not even be available here at home in the quality or the quantity needed. And further, many of you have already invested in infrastructure projects that protect your IP, ensures safe shipments, and protects your brand. These disruptions hinder growth and innovation because instead of focusing on creating that next great product, you're forced to reallocate your resources and adjust. So now, more than ever, we need to reduce these trade barriers so that we can help our businesses and our farmers get back to doing what they do best.
You know, we are not naive to the fact that some regulations may be necessary. We're advocating for free trade, but we know that free trade may not always be possible. Regulation is often necessary to protect consumers and possibly even equal out a playing field for some industries, as we heard from the dairy industry. However, a blanket on-again, off-again approach of applying tariffs or other non-tariff barriers, basically du jour, changing on a daily basis, is really hindering our company's planning process and cycles, and it's changing the rules of the game on a weekly basis. International trade is a long game, and companies make operational decisions based on many more factors than tariffs. But the tariffs, however, do impact pricing, and pricing certainly impacts a company's bottom line, and it certainly impacts us as consumers. International business is complicated enough, especially for our SMEs, our small to mid-sized companies. Our plea is to ease up on the trade barriers, especially as companies try to gain footing after this COVID crisis. Freer trade means the market can truly play out where the United States, our trading partners all thrive and specialize in what we do best. When unencumbered trade can bring about more advancements to the economy and increase jobs than about any other factor out there. The strengthening of trade throughout North America will only strengthen our relations with our neighbors and create more opportunities for all of us.
You're exactly right, Karen. Trade touches every aspect of our lives, and each step we take toward freer trade is a step toward greater prosperity for all of us. We need to remember that trade isn't something that happens overseas. It's something that happens right here at home. Now is the time to remind our leaders that trade is essential to Colorado, especially in light of the need for economic revitalization.
So our challenge to you is this. We ask that you contact our congressional delegation here at Colorado and humbly urge them to remove Section 232 tariffs to help revitalize our economy, because these tariffs harm American workers and businesses. These tariffs and the resulting retaliatory tariffs from other countries will continue to impose major costs on our competitiveness, growth, and economic security. And they are the wrong way to address the steel and aluminum global overcapacity. Every sector of our economy benefits from expanded trade because it offers us the opportunity for economic growth and revitalization. Now more than ever, Colorado depends on expanded trade and investment opportunities. When we're down after COVID, now is the time to invest in our future. With more than 95% of the world's consumers living overseas, free and fair trade offers us the opportunity to revitalize our economy.
So go to tradebuildscolorado.com and join our coalition of business, industry, and government leaders. Add your business's name to our letter to our congressional delegation and be a part of a unified voice to help drive free trade policy that can help us reignite our economy. Share your story, personal stories, real-life examples. It's the best way to communicate these impacts to our elected officials, because together we have the voice to remove these trade barriers that limit our economic potential and put us back on the path to prosperity. So if you haven't signed up already, on August 12th and August 13th, we have our videographer in the Denver area, and we'd love to help you share your story. We can come to your location, get some great B-roll, really highlight your business, the impact of trade barriers, as well as the benefits that trade brings. So please send us a message, and we'll make sure to reach out and get a time scheduled next week.
On behalf of Americans for Prosperity and the World Trade Center Denver, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists once again and for sharing your knowledge and insight. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Colorado Business Roundtable, the Colorado Farm Bureau, and of course, Manufacturers Edge for your support. We look forward to working together to support free trade and the prosperity that it brings. Thank you for joining us now. Now that it's lunchtime, we would suggest possibly looking at going and get yourself a good old North American hamburger. It certainly will taste so much better with all of North American farm products coming on, like avocados from Mexico and tomatoes from Canada or Mexico. And, you know, our beef, before it hits our plate, crosses over borders 9 times. So ask a farmer or rancher about that next time you're at a party. You've learned something now. Take a look at this image of the hamburger. Hopefully that juicy North American burger is something you'll partake in over lunch. Again, thank you all very much for being here, and thank our panelists once again. And Stefan, a biento, my friend. We'll see you soon. Take care, everyone.